Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a close look at the new GraphQL integration. And in fact, I'm going to be showing you how to build a crawled GraphQL app with Hasura. If you're new to Hasura, Hasura is an open source platform to convert any database into a GraphQL API. So if you have your database, you throw Hasura on top of it, you have instant GraphQL APIs. We're going to be using Hasura in today's video as our backend for GraphQL. And of course, this is a quick preview of the application we're going to be building. So it's a simple dashboard, but it uses GraphQL mutations and queries to talk to the database on top of Hasura. So this is the dashboard. You can see that we have a table right here, which is reading data from the database. Of course, we can go in to update the status of a record. For example, this is order in transit. I can say something like order arrived. And here we can go ahead to save that to the database. And of course, we can also create new records using the form we have right here. So I'm going to be showing you all of this and more in today's video. So that's a preview of what we'll be building in today's video. So today's video is going to cover a few core areas. One, starting with writing queries to pull data from the database. Then I'm also going to show you how to update records with GraphQL mutations. We're also going to take a look at how to create records, new records using mutations. And lastly, I'll show you how to create delete mutations. That is going to be totally new. That's going to be a live coding part. So stay tuned to the end for us to build that together live on this video. All right, we'll also be doing all of this using a new table widget you just saw. The new table widget supports inline editing, which I think is awesome. And we'll be taking a look at how to explore that feature in today's video. So my name is Confident and I am a developer advocate at AppSmith. Without any delay, let's get started. All right, so we have an idea of the app preview, and we also know that we'll be using Hasura for the backend. I already have a Hasura instance set up, as you can see. And if you take a look at the data, I have my Hasura instance connected to a Postgres database that has an orders table. So this is exactly what we see right here. And this is a bunch of order information that is being read by Hasura. So the first thing we want to do here is that we want to connect AppSmith to Hasura so that we can interact with the GraphQL API that has been generated on top of my Postgres database. So to do that, I need to head over to AppSmith. Let's create a new application. All right, so let's go to data sources. And something you notice here is that there are two ways of creating GraphQL APIs on AppSmith. You have the create new GraphQL API option, then you also have the authenticated GraphQL option, and you might be confused which to choose. So go with the create new GraphQL API if you want a single standalone API, which in some cases might not even require authentication. So this is a one-off API, and it's going to be useful in cases where you don't have to set up authentication. If you do need to set up authentication, you can always go to the API headers and set that up right here. But this is going to be for one-off situations. But if we go head back and take a look at the authenticated data source, so this is going to help you create an authenticated base URL that you can create multiple API endpoints from. And we're going to be going with this for today's video. So I'm going to name this data source GQL. All right. For my base URL, let's go grab this from Hasura. So this is going to be my base URL. All right. Then for the headers, and this is where the security part comes in. This is where I tell Hasura who is using this API. So I'm going to grab the X Hasura admin secret. So let's grab that, paste that in here. And I also need to grab my admin secrets. So I'm just going to grab this right here. All right, and we can head back to AppSmith and paste that in, and that looks good. Now, if you'll be connecting with an API that requires a more thorough authentication process, you actually have more authentication types here. So you could use basic, WAT2 API key, or BR token, depending on your use case. So this looks good. Now we can go ahead to save this. So I'm going to click on the save button, and we have our data source successfully created. Now that we have a data source created, we can start creating APIs using this data source. And the first API we're going to be creating is one to get orders from Hasura on top of our database. So let's create a new API to grab all orders, or grab orders rather. So let's call this get orders. All right, and as you can see, the base URL is already applied, and my authentication headers, as you can see, is already also applied, which is awesome. So now we can go into start writing the query. For that, we would need to write a query. So something you notice before writing a query is that the query pane is divided into two. You can see that we have a query section, and here we have a variable section. So this is how we can interact with the GraphQL API using these two. So we're going to go ahead to write our queries here, and then write our variables right here. And down below, we can see the response from running the query. So something you also notice right here is that we do not currently have support for GraphQL schema docs, which means we would not have things to like the documentation and autocomplete. But that's not going to be an issue because Hasura actually has a GraphQL playground. We can use this right here to build our query and copy them over, paste them in right here, and we should be good to go. So the first query we would need to write would be a query to get orders. And here we can use the Explorer to build that query out. So this is going to be in the orders query. And what we want to do is that we want to grab the order ID, food, address, image, name, notes, phone, and status. And if I go ahead to run this, this is going to pull out the entire data from the database, which is quite a lot. So let us figure out a way to paginate this data so that we're only pulling what is enough to display on a single page of a table widget, and then we'll head over to paginate the table widget that we'll be using in building the application. So let's go in to set this up. The first thing we want to do here is that we want to set a limit. So I'm going to set a limit of 10, for example. Then the next thing we want to do is that we want to give this an offset. Let's set the offset to 0 so that it's going to be starting from the first page in the database. And the last thing we want to do is we can add an order where we order by ID and set this to be ascending. So I can go run this right now, and you see that we have just 10 records being pulled from the database, which is so much better than pulling the entire data set. So now that I have this going nicely, what I'm going to do is convert the limit and the offset to variables. So let's convert this to variables. I'm going to create two variables, one having a variable name of limit, which would have a type of int because limit is a number. And we also need a variable for offset, which is going to have a type of int. So I'm going to use those variables here in places of the hard-coded value. So this is going to be limit, and of course this is going to be offset. And here's where we can go on to use those query variables. So let's expand this just a little bit, and here we can have a variable for limit. Let's set this to 10, and offset, let's set this to 0. And if I go run this again, it's going to be the exact same result, but the only change here is that I've moved the hard-coded data into variables, which makes it easy to interact with the API here. So now that this is done, we can actually go copy this over and use it in AppSmith. So I'm just going to copy over the query. So let's copy this and maybe paste this in right here. And we also need the variables. So I'm going to copy this over and paste it in right here. All right, so we have both of these here right now, both the query and the variable. And what I'm just going to do is run them. And you can see that we have the same response you saw from Hasura right here within AppSmith. So this works, and this is awesome. Now let's go on to display this data in the table widget. So I'm going to head over to the widgets section. Let's grab a table widget. So I'm just going to grab a table widget and place it right here. All right, so here we have a nice table. And for the actual table data, I'm going to bind this to the get orders query we just created. So this is going to be get orders.data. And if you take a look at this, we need to drill down into the data and the orders key. So this is going to be .data.orders. And here we are able to see the data coming from that query. So something you notice is that the columns are a bit messed up. So let's fix that. I'm going to move the ID. Let's move the image down, and we can move things like the phone number and address up a bit. All right, so this looks so much better. And here we have the table created. So now that we have the table done, one other thing we need to do is set up table pagination, because we have pagination on the query level, but we don't have it set up right now for the table widget. So to do that, that's pretty easy. I'm just going to come down here on the properties of the table and turn on server-side pagination. And then when the page change event happens, that is when clicking on the page change buttons right here, we want to go execute the get others query. And we can head back to the get others query and tweak things a little bit. So I'm going to be navigating using the omnibar navigation. Of course, you can hit Ctrl K or Command K and use the navigate mode Ctrl P or Command P. Or you can also navigate using the UI by clicking around, but I feel using the omnibar navigation is much faster. So let's head back here. Of course, I can do Ctrl P or Command P, and I would have searched for the get others query and I'll be brought right here. Now that we're here, one thing I want to do is make updates to the query variables. These are static values right now, so it means they won't work with the table pagination. So we need to make this dynamic. So for the limit, I am going to grab this from the table size. So this is going to be table1 dot page size. All right. And lastly, for the offset, this is going to come from the table offset. So this is going to be table1 dot page offset. As you can see right now, this evaluates to 11 and 0. So let's head back to the table widget and let's try using the table pagination. So I'm going to click on the buttons here. And as you can see, we are actually paginating through that data, which is awesome. So we have that data coming back. We can easily paginate through it. And this works really nicely with the GraphQL query we have set up. So we are done with the read query. The next thing we're going to do is move on to writing mutations to update records in the table widget. Now that we have the basic structure of our application down, we can continue by creating a flow that allows us to edit records in the database. And there are a number of ways this can be done in AppSmith. So here we have the table. I'm just going to move this to the side and let me show you some ways in which you can write data to the database. So let's go over to the widgets. There are a couple of options. The first we have is the form widget. And this is a regular form widget that has the form buttons. And then if you actually need to have input in these forms, you need to go grab an input widget, put it in right here, and you have to set up that input widget for the field you want edited. So if we want the status fields to be edited, we need to do something like this. So this is going to be table1.selectedRow.status. And we need to give this a label of status. And then we need to give it a column width of something like 10 so that it's visible. And this is just for one field. So imagine we want to edit all of the fields in a particular record. We'll need to keep doing this for every single field in the database, which could be quite troublesome. So a better approach would be to use the JSON form widget. So I'm just going to grab the JSON form widget right here. In case you didn't see it, I was using or referring to this widget right here, the JSON form widget. And what this does is that it is smart enough to figure out the fields you need just by supplying it a JSON object. So right here, what I need to do is just reference the widget I want the data to be pulled from. In this case, it's going to be table1.selectedRow. And as you can see, the JSON form widget has automatically generated a form with all of the right fields for me without having to set up each individual input, which can be really, really awesome and a really good time saver. So if I go select a new record, for example, we have this record right here. You would see that the entire data in this form is updated, and same also goes for selecting a different record. So this is also another option you have. But for today's video, we're going to be going with the latest option, and that is setting up inline editing within the table widget. So something you notice is that the table widget now has a property called editable. So I'm just going to turn this on, and you can see that all of the fields now have a pencil icon, which means that they are editable. but we do not want the ID to be editable, so I'm just going to turn this off for the ID, but everything else is editable, which is awesome. Then something else you also notice is that we have a new column that is automatically created called the save discard column, which would be triggered whenever we have an update state. So for example, if I go in to update the name of this user to John, for example, so let's say John, you would notice that the save discard state has been enabled for this row, and I can go on to save this if I have the logic set up. So let's go on to actually set up the logic for saving this updated data into the database. So what I'm going to do is let's head over to Hasura, and let us start by creating the mutation for this update workflow. So we would need a mutation, and I'm just going to delete this query right here, and let's go create a mutation. All right, and for the mutation, we want to be able to update a record. So this is going to be update orders, and here we want to update orders based on ID. So this is going to be where ID equal to a specific value, and what we want to do is we want to set the address, the food, the image, the name, the notes, the phone number, and status from the payload we'll be sending to this query. And of course, we want to return the affected rows. So this is a simple mutation that is going to help us get done exactly what we want. But since we are using GraphQL, we can actually make things nicer by using variables right here. So I'm going to have two variables. One is going to be for the condition. So I'm going to cut this out. So let's cut this out. This is going to be the condition variable. All right, and I'm just going to paste that value right here. And let's also call this condition as well. So this is going to be condition. All right, and the last thing we need right here is the actual payload, which is going to be the object we're sending up to this query. So this is going to be a payload, and the payload would be the entire object. So I'm just going to copy this over here, and let us paste this in right here. And we need to fix the payload because this expects everything to all be in quotes. So let's fix this. You know what, I'm just going to delete the rest because we don't really need everything here. Okay, so we need a condition variable, or we have a condition variable, and we also have a payload right here. Now we need to pass these variables to this mutation, and here is where we get to set them. So this is going to be for the condition variable. For the condition variable, we need to be able to figure out its type, and that is where the GraphQL documentation that's available here comes in. So if we take a look at the mutation here, the mutation docs, you'll notice that the update orders mutation has two parameters. You have the set and the where. For the set, which is the payload, this has a type of order set input, but for the where option, this is going to be the order boolean expression, and this is required. So I can go ahead to copy this over. So let's copy this over, and that will be the type for the condition, because the condition is going to be used for the where clause here. The next thing we need to do is we want to also use the payload variable. So this is going to be payload, and this is also going to have a type of order set input. So I'm just going to copy this right here, and let's use this in here. All right, and if I go run this, we should not have anything updated because we're actually passing in an empty ID. But this shows us that the query works and it's a valid query. Now, what we are going to do is we're going to copy all of this over, and let's head back to AppSmith, and let's create a new API using the GraphQL endpoint you saw earlier. So I'm going to go to data sources, GraphQL, and I can click on the create new API button, but I can also use the omnibar navigation. So this is going to be Ctrl+Shift+ or Command+Shift+, and here I can search for GQL, and we're going to create a new GQL query. So let's call this update order. All right, and here I'm going to paste in the query, and let's go copy the variable. All right, so this is the variable we need to pass along. Now, what I want to do is that I want to set things up in such a way that this mutation is executed from a JavaScript file. So let's go create a JavaScript file or JavaScript function that would do the update workflow. So here I'm just going to use Ctrl+Shift+ to create a new JS file. So this is going to be JS file. All right, and I'm going to call this app.js, and this file is going to have a function called update order. All right, it's going to be an async function, and here's where we can start to create the function body. All right, so the first thing I'm going to grab here is the payload. So this will be const payload, and we can grab the payload from the updated row in the table. So this is going to be table1.updated row, and if we do a console log here, so let's say payload, and let's go check the logs. Okay, let's go ahead to rerun this. You can see that in the logs, we actually have an object that represents the table column that has been, or table row rather, that has been updated. But something you notice right here is that all of the values are blank. This is a bug that is going to be fixed shortly. But at runtime, all of these values would be sent up to the function and it's going to be used in the query, so we don't have to worry about it so much. So we're able to grab the payload. The next thing we want to do is we want to create a condition. So let's say const condition. And for the condition, this is going to be the same as the where filter you saw right here. So I'm just going to copy this over. All right. And for the condition, we want to give it an ID. And of course, this ID is going to come from the ID of the entity that is the payload. So this is going to be payload.id, and here we're able to grab the ID of the record that is being updated. So now that we have both the condition and the payload, we can actually go run the update orders query. So this is going to be await update order the run, and here we want to pass in both the payload and the condition. And when that's done, we want to be able to refresh the state of our application by rerunning the get orders query. So this is going to be await get orders.run, and we are good to go. So I'm going to delete the console log we have here, and here we have a nice update order function. Now let's head back to the update order query or mutation, and let's actually use the variables we are passing in from the JavaScript function. So for the condition, this is going to come from the JavaScript function, and this is going to be coming from this.params.condition. All right, same also goes for the payload. This is going to come from this.params.payload. All right, and right now it's undefined, but at runtime, this data is going to get populated. So this looks nice. We can head back to the table widget. So let's head back to the table widget, and I'm going to set it up such that the save and discard button, or the save button, actually runs the update function. So let's head back here. So this is the save button. I'm going to set the save action to execute our app.js file and the update order function. So let's go ahead to save this and see if this works. We have this user's name updated to John. So let's see if this actually works. So I'm going to click on the save button. And as you can see, the user's name has been updated to John, and that got saved to the database. So this is how easy it is to set up an update workflow using the table inline editing feature and a GraphQL mutation. Next up, we're going to take a look at how to create new records using mutations as well. So let's start by creating the UI for the form that will be required to create a new record in the database. So I'm going to be using a JSON form widget here. But before bringing in the JSON form widget, I'm going to drop in a button on the canvas. Then we also need a modal. So let's go grab a modal. All right, and let's expand this modal a bit. I'm going to delete the buttons we have on the modal, and then we can go grab in a JSON form widget. So here is the JSON form widget. I'm just going to drop this here, and I'm going to change the styling of things a bit. So one thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the JSON form widget actually blends into the modal so that users can visually tell that these are two different widgets. So I'm going to go into the JSON form widget. I'm going to set the style to not have a border color. And I'm also going to remove the border radius and box shadow. The other thing I'm going to do is delete the form title because we're going to be using the modal title for the form. And taking a look at this, you can see that this blends into the modal widget. So for the modal title, I'm going to set this to new order. All right. And here, one other thing I'm going to do for the modal is I'm going to make it fixed and not scrollable. So here we have a fixed modal. Now for the actual form data, remember that the JSON form widget requires a JavaScript object. We can generate a form by passing it a JavaScript object. And for this table, we can take a look at the table column orders to figure out the object we need to pass in. So if you take a look at what we have in table 1 dot column order, you would see that we have all of the columns that are valuable on the table. So you have the ID, status, food address to the image. And of course, we have this dangling edit action 1, which is created by the save and discard button since we enabled inline editing. So we can fix that later. But what we need to do is we want to figure out a way to convert this array into an object, which is what the JSON form widget expects. So you can see we have an error here. This is not valid because it's not a JavaScript object. So let's convert this to an object using the reduce function. And this is going to take in a function that has a previous and current value, and we can pass in the function body. The function body is just going to be actually returning an object. So let's use the shortcut method or shortcut syntax, and we want to instantiate the previous value to an empty object. So what we're going to do is that for every previous value, we're going to spread it into the new object we're returning from this function. This is going to be spread previous value. Then we're going to create a new key with the current value and set its value to an empty string. And if you take a look at this, we've converted that array into an object, and you can see that the form has been automatically generated, which is awesome. So here we have everything done. I am going to make some tweaks to this. First, we do not want the ID to show up because that's going to be computed. We also don't want the edit actions 1 to show up because that's also not necessary. And here we have a clean looking form for us to make use of. So if I go type in stuff in this form, it's going to let me type in stuff, but we would not be able to save it because we do not have the logic for saving stuff to Hasura using GraphQL. So let's set that up, or let's fix that. What we need to do is create a mutation that is going to allow us to save data back to the database. So let's head over to Hasura and let's create that mutation. So this is going to be a mutation to insert one order. And here we want to pass in the ID, food, image, name, notes, font, status, and all of that stuff. Then we want to be able to return the order ID. And of course, this is an object we're passing up, so it looks exactly like the payload from the previous example we saw. So in fact, I'm just going to abstract this into a payload variable. So let's call this payload. And we need to make some updates here. So I'm going to delete the condition because we do not need a condition here, but we do need a payload. And I'll also need to edit the query variables here. But something you notice is that we have an error. That's because the type of the payload for an insert order operation is actually quite different. So if you take a look at the type information right here, so for insert orders 1, the object is going to be an orders insert input, and this is going to be required. So I'm going to copy this over and let's use that right here. All right, so this is going to be the query, or actually the mutation that is required to create a new item into the database. So since this is done, I'm just going to copy it over and let's go create a new GraphQL query using our GQL data source. And I'm going to call this the create order mutation. So let's call this create order. All right. And I'm going to paste in the mutation, and we also want to grab the query variables. Okay, so that's it for the query part. We'll come back to this so that we can actually read the data from the parameters, or in fact, I can just set this up right now since we've done this before. So for the actual payloads value, this is going to come from the parameters sent into this query during runtime. So this is going to be this.params.payload, and we should be good to go. So now let's head back to the app.js file. And what we want to do is create a new function that is going to enable us to create an order. So this is going to be create order function, and it's going to be async. Here is going to be the function body. All right, so this is going to be the function body. And what we want to do is, the first thing we actually want to do here is we want to figure out a way to generate the ID of the order. So I have this JS string that is just going to do exactly that. And I can do a quick console log here for you to see it. So console.log ID. This is using math.random. And if I go ahead to run this and we'll go check the logs, you see that we have a random ID right here. So I can filter by console logs, and let's run this one more time, or a couple of times. You can see that we have random IDs each time this function runs. All right, so that looks good. The next thing we want to do is pull out the payload from the JSON form widget. So this is going to be const payload, which is going to come from the JSON form widget and the ID we have just created. So I'm going to spread data coming from JSON form one.form data, and also want to add in the ID. And if we do a quick console log here of the payload, we should be able to see that outputted out. So as you can see, this is the JSON form with all of the values I entered in. Before I was just typing in a bunch of A's. And of course, this is the ID which has just been generated. So this looks awesome. This works. The next thing we want to do is to run the create order query. And we want to pass in the payload as a parameter to that query. So this is going to be, or the mutation actually. So this is going to be const, actually this is going to be await create order.run, and we want to be able to pass in the payload. All right, so that looks good. The next thing we want to do is that since we know this function is going to be run from an open modal, we want to do some housekeeping. We want to close up the modal, and then we want to rerun the get orders query. So let's actually start by running the get orders query. So this is going to be await get orders.run, so that we have the app state updated. Then we're going to close off the modal. So this is going to be close modal, and the name of that modal widget is modal1. And one other thing we can do is show an alert to let the user know that the record has been created. So we can do show alert, and we can say order with ID of ID is created, and we can set the alert type to success. All right, so this looks nice, and I can go on to delete the console log. So now if we head back to the JSON form widget, you can see that the name of the modal is actually modal1, but here at the JSON form widget, we want to set the submit button to run the create order function we just created. So what we're going to do is when the onSubmit event happens, we want to go execute the create order function, and we should be good to go. So I'm going to set everything to all A's. So let's set everything to A, and I'm just going to go ahead to submit this, and we should have that record created. All right, so we have that record created. Now we have to just go figure out where it is. So let's try to find that record. Okay, so I'm just going to keep checking other pages. And here you can see that we have that record showing up. This is the only record with all A's, and it was created from the form right now. So the create workflow actually works, and we can head back here to set the label to new record or new order. And that's lovely. Now, the last thing I'm going to be showing you is how to write a delete mutation. And this is where we're going to be live coding this together. I haven't practiced this, so we're just going to be live coding and exploring how you would go about setting up a delete workflow using GraphQL on AppSmith. So to start with the setup, let's head over to Hasura and let's take a look at a delete query. So we can take a look at this delete mutation rather. So this is going to be a delete mutation, and we can filter by ID. We can say something like where ID equal to a particular value, and we just want to return the affected rows. So this is how a delete mutation would look like. But we can also use variables here. So for the where here, this is going to be a condition variable. So I'm just going to go ahead to replace this with a condition. All right. And here is where I am also going to reuse the condition. So this is going to be all in quotes, and we would have the condition copied over, used here, and also used here. But we would need to update the type of the condition, because if you take a look at the docs here, the condition is going to be an other Boolean expression. So let's copy this, and it's also required. I'm just going to copy this over, delete what we already have here, paste that in, and if I go run this, we should be good to go. We actually did not delete any record because we don't have a valid ID, but this gives us a sense that this query actually works. So I'm going to copy over the mutation, not query, and let's go create a new GQL data API using the GQL data source. So this is going to be the query, paste that in right here. We also need the condition. So I'm just going to copy this, paste that in right here. And as you've already seen, this condition is going to come from the query parameter sent into this query or API, if that makes sense. So this is going to be this dot params dot condition. All right, and we need to add a delete function in our app.js file. So this is app.js file, and we need to add a function for the delete operation. So this is going to be delete order, and this is going to take in an ID, and it's going to be an async function, by the way. So this is going to be async. So it's going to take in an ID, and here is going to be the function body. There's something I did not do earlier. I did not have the name of the API properly named. So I'm just going to head over here and call this the delete order, and we should be good to go. All right, so that's what happens when you code live. Let's head back to the app.js file. All right, so this is the app.js file. And what I want to do here is that I want to take in the ID, create the condition, and then run that query. So for the condition, so this is going to be const condition. It is going to be a condition that looks exactly like this, but using the ID passed. So I'm just going to copy over the condition used in that variable over there, paste it in right here, and set the actual ID to come from the variable or argument passed into this function. So here is the condition, and then we're going to run the delete orders query. So this is going to be await delete orders.run. Then we're going to pass in the condition. And the next thing we want to do here is, seems like I have a typo. Okay, I have a typo here. So the next thing we want to do is that we want to update the state of our application by rerunning the get orders query. So this is going to be await get orders.run, and we are good to go when it comes to the function. Now we need to set up the UI to have this triggered from the UI. So I'm going to head over to the table widget. And what I want to do in the table widget is I'm going to create a new column that is going to be a custom column called delete. All right, so this is the new column we are creating right now. It's called delete. Now let's go in to set the column type to an icon button, and we can set the icon to be the trash icon. All right, so let's style this a bit. I'm going to head over to the color and set this to red, and we can make this a secondary icon button, and that uses an outline shape. All right, so this looks nice. Now, when the button is clicked on, we want to go execute the delete function. So this is going to be, I think I clicked on something I should have not. So let's delete this. Okay, so heading back to the table widget, we want to go set the action such that when it is clicked on, we go execute a JavaScript function, and that's going to be in the app.js file, and that would be the delete other function. So this requires an ID. We can grab the ID from the row that triggered the update or the row that was clicked on. So this is going to be table 1 dot triggered row, and we need to grab just the ID. So that's the ID of the row that was selected, and this is the row we just created. So let's try to delete this row or this record. So I'm going to click on the delete button here. So let's click on the delete button, and you can see that that record has been deleted. So our delete operation actually works, and in fact I'm just going to edit the table just a little bit, move the delete button before the save discard button. So let's do that. All right, and this looks nice. So I can head over here to finish the application, grab a text widget and say something like manage orders, and set the text style to extra large, and here we have a nice built application. So I'm going to deploy my app right now, and this looks nice. It looks nice, it works great, and everything works as you saw while we were building this out. Now, something you'll notice is that we do not yet have support for GraphQL subscriptions. So as I was building along, you notice we don't have support for GraphQL subscriptions. This is something that will be coming in the future, and it's going to make it easy for you to build real-time apps on AppSmith. All right, so that's all for our video today, guys. If you did enjoy this video, we actually have other videos that we think you would find interesting. We made this video right here on creating a CRUD app using MongoDB. So go check that out to learn how to create a CRUD app in MongoDB in less than 5 minutes. And we also made a video right here on creating CRUD applications using Airtable. So if you like something different, go check that out to see how to create CRUD apps using Airtable. That's all for today's video. Don't forget to get subscribed and like this video, and I'm going to see you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.